Welcome to Hometown Horrors. This is a new series on my channel, a series I'm calling Hometown Horrors. This series aims to deep dive into towns all across the US and heck, maybe even other places that aren't here someday soon when we run out of things. The series will deep dive into cities just near you, or heck, maybe even the one you live in or grew up in. Because, do you really know, behind all the smiling faces, the waving neighbors, what's truly going on in your backyard? Come here. Come close. Closer. Welcome. I've concocted myself a lovely Negroni cocktail. Today, we're entering into Springfield, Missouri, a seemingly ordinary town in the U.S. Let's be honest, anywhere ordinary in Missouri. I remember I went there as a child once, and because my parents wanted to live there for some reason. There were, someone had taken snakes and hanged them all over, the stop signs in the town, real live snakes, but they were dead, not living snakes. They were dead snakes, and they hung them all over the signs, and they, to, scare people away, like investors, my mom was like, I don't think we should buy here, Anyways, Springfield, Missouri, a seemingly ordinary town from the outside looking in, full of smiling faces, children riding their little bicycles. But behind those fresh-cut lawns and smiling faces lurks a darkness you'd never expect. From unsolved disappearances and ghostly legends to the chilling acts of true-life monsters hiding in plain sight, Springfield, Missouri is proof that you never really know what horrors might be hiding right in your backyard. It is now the next day. I spent all night until 4 a.m. working on that intro you just saw, and now we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of the story, okay? We're going to go into the supernatural stories of the town first. We're going to uncover all the lore that there is to offer about this town, okay? The first one we're going to be starting out with is the Albino Farm and Hatchet Man's Bridge. Because if you don't know, every good ghost story is centered around a bridge. Here we go. For students of a certain age, collective lore says traveling north from Springfield on National Avenue was said to bring a brush with death, or at least a good scare. Stories vary about the place known as the Albino Farm, located near Green Lawn Cemetery north of town. At their core, they generally involve someone affected with albinism, a condition which often results in white hair and very light-colored skin, according to information from the Mayo Clinic. Okay, but why is it called the Mayo Clinic? Somebody was like, all right, what are we going to call this place? We're going to be focusing on albino research, all right? No funny business. I don't want any funny answers. How about Mayo Clinic? That's not bad. Some said the place was inhabited by a colony of people with albinism. Other more horrific versions of the story suggest that individuals with albinism were chained in a dungeon and subjected to science experiments, or that there was an albino farmhand who might carry a hatchet. Nothing scarier than a white man with a hatchet. The stories were accentuated by an eerie old metal bridge, which was known as Hatchet Man's Bridge, or Haunted Bridge. Why not Albino Hatchet Man's Bridge? That's scarier. One version of the tale focuses on a young couple who stopped their car on a bridge many years ago, and then it wouldn't start again. As the story goes, the young man got out of the car and told his date, do not open the door under any circumstances. She soon heard thumping on the roof of the car. Honey, don't come out here. Bah, bah, bah. But heeded his warning and did not look outside. This was just a meetup. This was just a booty call for her boyfriend or husband. This was just a booty call. The next morning, she was awakened by the police, who escorted her from the car and also told her not to look behind her. Don't look back! Don't look back there. You ain't gonna like what you see. Oh, you ain't gonna like it. She looked anyway and saw her boyfriend dead, hanging from a tree limb above the car. How was there a tree on a bridge? Another version of the story involves a man with a hook for an arm. Despite the varying details, these stories and more were tied to the farm, which was formerly known as Spring Lawn Farm. The estate was initially founded in the 1800s by Headley family. After the turn of the 20th century, it was purchased by Mike Sheedy, an Irish immigrant with quite a few kids and even greater acreage. But by the 1960s, just 3 of his single daughters remained living on the property. It seems it was around this era when the legends really began to take off. It was just an Irish man. One person who remembers these stories firsthand is Stephen Spencer, a photographer who grew up in Springfield and graduated from Hillcrest High School in 1973.
I use the albino farm as an excuse for being late for school a lot, he recalls. I would tell the teacher, Daisy Jenkins, that I had missed the bus and only the shortcut was to go through the albino farm. I would tell her, and the students, that while cutting through the property, they, albinos, would see me and start chasing me with axes and pitchforks until I hit the other side of the property to make my escape. The class was always more interested in what happened than her, and she would always give me a look before telling me to take my seat.
While scary, the stories did not keep youngsters away from the property.
Farm Road 165 was the best place to take your date to scare her, which backfired on many guys that wanted to hightail it out of there first. But we figured it would be cheaper and quicker to get the girls in our arms there than the drive-in movies,
Spencer writes, also sharing another version of the bridge story. As he tells it, an escape from the medical center for the federal prisoners murdered a couple and put their heads on either side of the bridge's railings.
So you had at least 3 chances within a quarter of a mile to scare, be scared, and impress or deflate your date with bravery,
Spencer said. Alright, Spencer's just a dirty dog. It sounds like an Irishman moved into town and everyone, all these like hicks from Missouri were just like beside themselves with how white he was and his family. And they just made up an entire ghost story about it. He was probably just like chopping wood for his family and they were spazzing out all over it. Give the guy a break, okay? That's our first story. We learned to stay away from Irish people. The second story is keeping on brand. This local legend is called Bride of the Bridge. Now, this is 2 bridge stories we've gotten so far from Springfield. What's going on with all these bridges? While many ghost stories and legends have missing information, one where precious few facts are known ties to a legend known as Bride of the Bridge. At its core, though, it ties to sightings of a ghostly presence near a vintage stone bridge in Springfield's Phelps Grove Park.
The story I was always told was this happened right after World War I,
writes Richard Crabtree, a historian and realtor who runs the Springfield, Missouri History, Landmarks, and Vintage Photography Facebook group.
Since Phelps Grove Park had more or less an oval track to it, it was a hotbed for youngsters to get up in there in their Model Ts, go down there and race.
It was that reality, Crabtree says, that led to the story of a tragic incident for a young couple the same day as their marriage.
It supposedly was on her wedding day, and they hit the bridge, and he stayed in the car.
He says of the bride and groom.
She was thrown from the car and smashed into the bridge, and that's where she died. So that is the story. They see a lady in a wedding gown.
So that is the story.
Of course, in the 1910s, going into the 20s,
her dress
could have been traditionally long, could be short. Nobody knows. They just see a figure. We don't know his or her name. We don't know when it happened.
These people are just bored and are making up stories. All right, Stay away from bridges. Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a bunch of scraps! Now, with that story coming to a close, we move on to the more sinister side of things, the more chilling side of crime. The true stories, the things that lurk right down your street, the things that people don't joke about around the campfires. Unless you're f***ed up, dude. That is f***ed. Holy crap, dude. You are frigged. That is frigged up, dude. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't! Now, not only is Springfield, Missouri a hotbed for ghost, ghouls, and little creatures of such nature that you cannot even explain, it's also a home to a few of the most notorious kidnappings, missing persons, and murders. So, with that being said, we're going to move on to our main story of the night, the Springfield 3. The Springfield 3 refers to an unsolved missing persons case that began in June 7th, 1992, when friends Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall and Streeter's mother, Cheryl Levitt, went missing from the Levitt's home in Springfield, Missouri.
And I'm telling them that, if they've seen this guy or have any knowledge of this particular individual.
Randy Price, like dozens of other Springfield officers, is doing his part to find out what happened to the 3 missing women.
All of their personal belongings, including cars and purses, were left behind. There were no signs of a struggle except a broken porch light globe. There was also a message in the answering machine that police believe might have provided a clue about the disappearances, but it was inadvertently erased. June 7th, 1992. Around 9 a.m., Kirby, a friend of the missing people, and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, visited the house after Streeter and McCall failed to show up at her home. They had planned to spend the day at Whitewater and were supposed to leave from Kirby's residence. I started getting worried because Stacy, she's so responsible, and so is Susie, said Kirby. I know they wouldn't just take off without telling us they weren't going to Whitewater. Upon arriving, Kirby found the home's front door unlocked and entered, but found no sign of Streeter, McCall, or Levitt. Each of the women's cars were parked outside. She also reported to the police that the glass lampshade on the porch light was shattered, though the light bulb itself was intact. Henson innocently helped Kirby sweep the broken glass off the porch, which police later determined may have destroyed potential evidence. Henson stated that he did this because Kirby was barefooted. Nigel Kenny, a co-worker and close friend of Streeter's, stated she was a creature of habit and was particular about parking her vehicle in the same spot of the residence's driveway. Kenny believes that because Streeter's car was not in the carport as usual, someone else could have possibly parked in her spot when she and McCall arrived before dawn on June 7th. Inside the house, Kirby found Levitt and Streeter's dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, who appeared agitated. As they were leaving the residence, Kirby answered a strange and disturbing call from an unidentified male who made sexual innuendos. She hung up and immediately received another call of a sexual nature, again hanging up the phone. The phone calls were jarring, but she remembered Streeter complaining about prank calls at the residence since moving in with Levitt in spring of 1992. According to Springfield Police Department's David Asher, the calls were obscene. The individual would not identify himself, they were using the F word and several other words, and she just hung up the phone. Almost immediately, the phone rings again. Obscene phone call, again, click, it's over, said Asher. Kirby described the caller as teenish. With no sign of Streeter or McCall, Kirby and Henson decided to visit the local water park Hydra Slide, now defunct, in Springfield instead of Whitewater and Branson. Several hours later, McCall's mother, Janice, also visited the house as her daughter failed to answer her calls all day. Janice had friends who knew employees of Whitewater and became panicked after they confirmed Streeter and McCall had not been seen there. Inside the Delmer residence, the family dog Cinnamon comes barreling towards her. The dog was in there just going crazy, just yipping and crying, says Janice. She noticed all 3 women's purses were sitting on the floor of Streeter's bedroom. Levitt's purse still contained a cash deposit of almost $900 from her work at the salon. Janice also saw her daughter's clothing neatly folded from the night before, the only clothes McCall had possession of that night. Janice noticed that Stacy's shirt and underwear were missing. There were recently used makeup wipes of Streeter and McCall found along with jewelry and keys. Levitt and Streeter's cigarettes were left inside the house, which was considered unusual of Levitt's friends and family, who described her as a chain smoker. An unfinished can of Coke was also found next to Streeter's pack of cigarettes in her bedroom. On Streeter's headboard was the book Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. The lights were off in Streeter's room, and her television was showing snow, suggesting they had been watching a movie that night but never turned off the television after it was finished. Janice frantically called police from the home's telephone to report the 3 women missing. After placing the call while checking the phone's answering machine, she listened to a strange message, but it was inadvertently erased, as was common for most voicemails in 1990s after being played once. Police were very interested in the call and believed it may have contained a clue. They also did not believe it was connected to the prank calls Kirby received. McCall's parents contacted police in reference to their daughter's disappearance from Levitt's home more than 16 hours after the women were last seen. And other worried friends and family called and visited the house the following day. Police later estimated that the crime scene had been corrupted by at least 10 to 20 people who visited the Levitt's house and tidied up the residence while the women were missing, including emptying ashtrays and cleaning up coffee cups. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed were several people in the yard. The door was open, and people were coming and going from inside the house. Upon the officer's arrival, the scene showed no signs of a struggle, except for the shattered porch light. The police also noted Levitt's bed had looked slept in an awkwardly bent window blind. All personal property was left behind, including purses, money, cars, driver's licenses, keys, medicine, cigarettes, and the family dog Cinnamon, who was most likely the only witness of the women's disappearance. Levitt had a doctor's appointment scheduled Monday, June 8th. She was also scheduled to work later that week at New Attitudes Hair Salon. McCall was scheduled to work on June 8th at the Springfield Gymnastics Center. Streeter was scheduled to work at a local movie theater on Tuesday, June 9th, 1992, at 4 p.m. None of the women would ever arrive for these dates. Suspects. Now, there's a few suspects in this case. A case that is still ongoing to this day, still filed as a missing persons case. Dustin Rekla was a former boyfriend of Susie Streeter. He broke into a Springfield mausoleum a few months before the women vanished, stole $30 worth of gold fillings from a skull. That is a very low worth amount of money to defile a grave for. Police looked at Rekla because Streeter had given investigators a statement about a mausoleum break-in and was rumored to be a probable witness against Rekla in court. Rekla and his 2 friends that helped the mausoleum robbery were known to be together in the area the night the women went missing. Larry Dwayne Hall is a suspected serial killer who traveled around the Midwest for historical reenactments of Civil War and is believed to have abducted and murdered dozens of girls and women. Wilson's Creek National Battlefield is located just 5 minutes from the Kirby residence. There were also 2 battle reenactments in the morning and afternoon of June 6 in Pleasant Hope, Missouri, located 30 minutes north of Springfield. Jimmy Keene, a former FBI operative, was tasked with befriending Hall in prison and gaining his trust. Hall admitted to specific details about many of his crimes and murders and graphic details to Keene that no one but the killer could have known. In 1997, Robert Craig Cox, imprisoned in Texas as a convicted kidnapper and robber, and the suspect in a Florida murder, told the journalists that he knew the 3 women had been murdered and buried, and claimed their bodies would never be found. Now, that concludes our disturbing true crime segment of this video, and brings us to an end. And there you have it. Sometimes evil doesn't need a big city to make itself at home. Sometimes evil sneaks into the quietest corners, the friendliest blocks, maybe even your own. But this was Springfield, Missouri. Maybe next time it'll be your hometown.